Diane Abbott, she's Labour's Shadow Home Secretary. She's just given a speech at Labour Party conference in Brighton. Now, she spoke very passionately about the Grenfell Tower fire disaster a few months ago. Now, I just want us to have a little listen to this, because I think this is really interesting.
This did not happen in a slum, in an impoverished country far away. It happened here in Britain, in one of the wealthiest areas of the country, in one of the richest countries of the world. And Tory-controlled Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea treated the residents of Grenfell like second-class citizens. Events at Grenfell are also a direct consequence of deregulation, of fire standards and inspection, privatisation and outsourcing. We demand justice for the Grenfell survivors. They will not be forgotten.
I think that was spot on from Diane Abbott. I think the Grenfell Tower disaster tells us a lot about how this country's run. For years, those working class residents of that block warned of an impending fire, a disaster which would take the lives of people in that block, and they were ignored. Because that's what we do in this country, isn't it? We ignore working class people. We demonise them. And look what happens. Grenfell tells us of a society in which it is possible to choose cladding which is cheaper and flammable, rather than spending a bit more money on flammable on cladding that won't combust if a fire happens to break out. Grenfell tells us of a society where we can have already fire disasters, and out of that, it becomes very clear that action needs to be taken, whether it be sprinklers in buildings, whether it be proper fire safety regulations, but it doesn't happen. Do you know why it doesn't happen? Because it's red tape, it's regulations, it's burdensome on landlords and others who happen to be the beneficiaries of the way this country's run. Grenfell Tower told us of a society in which profit comes not just before people's aspirations, not just before their needs, it comes before their lives. Now, back in the 19th century, there was a Victorian concept called social murder. And the idea of social murder was that the way society was run and rigged was such that the inevitable consequence was people died. And that society knew that people would die, that their lives were at risk, but the way society was structured made it inevitable. Social murder. Now, John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, got into, there was a big media furore when he used that term. I wish there'd been more media furore before that disaster happened about the fact that the likes of Grenfell Tower were disasters waiting to happen, because there wasn't even 0.01% of outrage before by those same commentators about the fact that this country is so unbelievably unsafe because we don't have the regulations in place to protect people's lives. And that's why, for me, Grenfell Tower wasn't just some horrendous, despicable, avoidable tragedy. The richest borough in London, in one of the richest cities, in one of the richest countries that have ever existed. If we'd seen those scenes in Bangladesh, we'd have been shocked. But it happened here, in Britain, in 2017. And it never needed to happen. And it tells us of that society, a bankrupt society, that is rigged in favour of tiny, contemptuous, shameless elites who've done so well over the last few years. Whilst for working class people and for the majority of society, life is often insecure and unsafe, as we saw in this terrible, terrible disaster. And that's why, for me, all of us now have to question the very way our country's run. It's not about changing governments anymore. Yeah, sure, I'd like that to happen. Cards on the table. It's about the social order. It's about the system that runs this country. It's not enough to tut or even cry over what happened at Grenfell Tower and they just turn away. We've all got to question a society where it's possible that profit comes before people's lives, where we don't have the regulations in place, where society's rigged in favour of vested interests, not the real majority. So I hail what Diane Abbott said. I think it's courageous, and all of us need to question a lot more the way this country...
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.